Like screenwriters working on the set of an unfinished movie, pages just keep getting added to the saga that is St. Luke's versus Ammon Bundy. The original lawsuit filed by St. Luke's Health System back in May of last year against the anti-government activist has had several chapters and a lot of court filings since then. We've broken down about, well, pretty much most of it about a month ago. And you can find that story on our YouTube channel, including a timeline that began with the People's Rights Network days-long protest outside St. Luke's Boise in March of 2022 because of a child taken in there by Child Protective Services. Well, it caused the hospital to go on lockdown for a couple of hours on March 15th. So St. Luke's filed the civil lawsuit against Bundy and his People's Rights Network for defamation because even after that protest, St. Luke's claims Bundy and his friend Diego Rodriguez continued to harass and threaten St. Luke's doctors and staff. Of course, there was a ton of paperwork involved with the civil lawsuit, which had to be served to Bundy over the last year, and that paperwork piled up. The Gem County Sheriff, well, then he briefly refused to serve those papers anymore. And the judge overseeing this case issued a civil arrest warrant for Bundy to appear since he has refused to participate at all in this lawsuit, a warrant that has also not yet been served. Judge Lynn Norton then issued a default judgment against Bundy last month, again because he hasn't shown up at all, and ordered him to appear for a deposition to decide damages in this lawsuit. Okay, so that's a bit of the brief backstory, and that brings us to today. The day scheduled for that deposition, where you can see Bundy didn't show. There's the Ada County Court reporter waiting to shorthand all of his answers, and there's the backdrop, which would have been behind him, and what you'd see in that video recording to make it all look official and stuff. So yeah, nobody was there for that deposition. Anyway, that was supposed to happen today, and according to St. Luke's attorneys, he was supposed to turn in discovery documents on Monday. Neither happened. In addition, yesterday, St. Luke's attorneys filed more paperwork. One of them, a declaration by Holland & Hart's Eric Stidham, claiming Bundy is actively trying to hide his assets to avoid paying possible penalties involved with this lawsuit. And he's supposedly doing that by setting up shell companies with the help of a friend in Wyoming and Idaho to hold those assets in trust, so they would not be able to be accessed. Yesterday's filing contained documents provided by Prime Corporate Services, a Utah company which specializes in setting up businesses. And they show a company called Farmhouse Holdings, LLC, was recently established under another recently established company called White Barn Enterprises, LLC. Farmhouse is based in Wyoming. White Barn is based in Post Falls, Idaho. But both companies show the manager as one Aaron Welling. White Barn Enterprises recently bought Bundy's 5-acre home in Emmett, worth an estimated $1.2 million. Bundy is paying nearly $2,600 in rent to live there and apparently to hold long-term camp-out cookouts. So why did Bundy sell his home? Well, because back in November, a lien was put on his property for failing to pay attorney's fees after not complying with a court order from the month before. So to get out from under that lien, Bundy transferred ownership of his Emmett property to White Barn Enterprises. The declaration for yesterday also shows emails from December showing Aaron Welling asking a representative of Prime Corporate Services about moving assets to White Barn Enterprises or to Farmhouse Holdings, to which it was explained the Wyoming holding company is for anonymity, and people can't see you as the member or your mailing address. That's kind of how it works with Wyoming LLCs. Apparently, you can just hide stuff. That beneficial ownership, the email went on, means everything in the Wyoming company can be included in a trust, and they can avoid probate, or basically avoid any of those assets being taken. Aaron Welling, by the way, also owns Potter's Construction in Emmett, which was also recently organized under Farmhouse Holdings, that Wyoming company. So Aaron Welling, whose name is on all three of these companies, also happens to be a good friend of Ammon Bundy. So today we reached out to Bundy, who is still not arrested and was just hanging out at home. We wanted to ask him about this declaration and whether he was familiar with White Barn Enterprises or Farmhouse Holdings or even Potter's Construction.
I'm familiar with Potter's Construction and White Barn because White Barn bought my house. And Potter's Construction is a company that does construction here in Emmett.
Okay.
And I know the owner.
Who's the owner?
Aaron Welling.
Isn't he the former treasurer of your campaign for governor?
He is.
Are you familiar with emails between him and Prime Corporate Services talking about moving assets into either of these companies?
No, I'm not.
According to some of these filings, White Barn Enterprises is listed as the manager of Farmhouse Holdings, which is listed as the manager of Potter's Construction. So they're connected.
okay, it doesn't sound like it's anything illegitimate. I don't know really what he does with the assets. All I know is I sold him my property legitimately, and I have no idea what he does with his business. St. Luke's put a lien on my home, and I paid the lien off, and I sold it.
Okay, so the last of that was this. I asked him about this idea of him creating these shell companies to hide the assets. You know, what did he have to say about that? He claimed it was just garbage. He had this company from what he says Welling had this company from what Bundy understands long before he had any trouble with his home or anything else. That's what Bundy said. But that long before isn't exactly accurate. Looking at the registration filings for these companies, White Barn Enterprises in Post Falls and Farmhouse Holdings in Wyoming, they were both established in July of 2022, which was 2 months after the lawsuit was filed by St. Luke's, and 2 months after Bundy apparently decided he wasn't going to participate in the lawsuit in any way. Wasn't worth it to him, he said. He told us and others he wouldn't lose any more money fighting it. Today's failure to appear at the deposition led to another failure to comply filing. By the way, 10 days ago, Bundy asked to move this lawsuit to a federal court, and he's still waiting to see if that happens. He's also told us he's offered St. Luke's everything he owns to pay for the lawsuit, which isn't much anymore. And St. Luke's has told us, well, it's not really about the money anymore. Well, it's not really about the money. I should say it is about the money, but it's not really about getting that money from Bundy. Stidham has been clear. This case going forward and the compelling Bundy to participate in a deposition, all of that is about pointing out the grift of the People's Rights Network. And this declaration is part of that. They want to bring to light how much money Bundy and Rodriguez have made and now hiding as a professional extremist and conflict entrepreneur. And if you're familiar with what happened with Alec Jones, St. Luke seems to be following the same playbook.